Well, it's definitely great to be together this morning. Really excited about what's happening in the church. I'm so grateful for the encouragement that's been coming forward, that the things that are happening. We're going to have a baptism later today, which is going to be amazing. But just, I really feel the Spirit sweeping through the church in so many ways, and I'm very excited about that. And today, we want to continue the conversation from last week because some of you guys were gone for Labor Day, and so let me give you a little recap. We did talk about last week about the desert and what the desert has to offer us. And the way I kind of kicked it off last week was we talked about some of our favorite vacation spots that we might want to go to. I said, what if I gave you 2 weeks paid vacation? You can go anywhere you want. And I showed you some pictures up on the screen of what some vacation spots could be. But I wanted to hear from a couple of people, what would be your favorite vacation spot and why? Like, where would it be and why would you want to go? So we're going to have the catch box right here. And we have our incredible technician here, Bella. Give her a round of applause, please. And if you raise your hand, let's hear where you want to go on vacation. She's going to throw it to you.
I want to go to Ethiopia. And my reason for that, when as a child, my dad, as a musician, traveled all these places. And he would bring back pictures of the pyramid and just how it really erupts. So I truly want to go there. And outside of that, we have a lot of Jamaicans living in Ethiopia.
Nice. Wow. Okay, great. And the reason why we do the catch box is because we're trying to promote a little bit of a two-way street environment. So it's more of a family in Jack's church, more than a performance. And so that's one of the reasons why it's great for us to be together. Okay, was there a hand? Okay, there's a hand over there,
So I would like to revisit Tulum, Mexico. And if you haven't been, it's so beautiful. It's a quick trip to Mexico. And the reason why I choose Mexico out of everywhere is because I need my parents to watch my kids because I don't want to take my kids with me on this wonderful vacation. Because for those of you who don't know, they're 1 and 3, so they cry, diapers, you know, that drill. But it's beautiful. There's live music all the time. It's kind of like a hippie spot. You eat right on the ocean. You live right on the ocean. They catch your meal right off the ocean. It's just a laid-back vibe, and it's a quick trip, so, with no kids.
It's nice having parents watch the kids, isn't it? Uh-huh. Ooh, nice catch.
So if I had 2 weeks paid vacation, I'll go to the best county in Florida, Duval County. We got the beach, we got the Jags, and we got the river. So what more could you want? 2 weeks, Duval County, come on.
Duval.
This guy.
All right, I want to go back to Mallorca, Spain. I've been there before. I've been all over Spain. But Mallorca is just beautiful island, crystal clear water, beaches, and it's a great place to visit.
Spain, that's awesome. Yeah, go to Barcelona game. That's great.
Yeah, Barcelona's cool too.
There you go. Okay, last one. Dane in the corner.
Maybe I should walk it over there.
What a gentleman. What a gentleman.
Safety first.
It's very soft though, even if it's like a sponge.
Hello. Well, I grew up, my family never really went on vacations. My dad fixed a house or we went to visit his family. And that's kind of, I like vacations at home and going to visit my friends, like where I used to live in Massachusetts and Washington and places like that.
That's great. Okay, round of applause for everybody sharing. Thank you. It's so nice to hear from each other, and you can imagine if this was in a U, how we actually could see each other and face each other, which would be amazing. So we're excited about that for the future. But one of the things is I noticed that nobody did mention, although Ethiopia was mentioned, but nobody really mentioned going to the desert like this shot right here. It's just not a place you typically pick, right, Miranda? And there's a reason for that, because the desert is pretty unforgiving. It's pretty harsh. There's not a lot of water. There's not a lot of shade. And so it's not typically the place. I mean, you do get a good suntan there, so that's good. Sunburn, yeah. But it's not the place you would typically pick. But last week, what we started to muse upon was, are there lessons though in the desert and things to be gained from the desert that we can't get in other places? And we all go through times in the desert, and I think we did have a really powerful time last week talking together about the desert and how we can reframe it. Because if you think about it, God could have done anything with the Israelites, but after he took them out of Egypt, he took them to the desert for a while. And that was for them to learn to love him. And that's where they learned to rely on him in the desert. You know, it's been said before that it was easier for God to take his people out of Egypt than to take Egypt out of his people. And that can be true for us too. Sometimes it's easier for us to go someplace physically than to get the culture out and to learn to love God. And last week was great on a more biblical, theological level, but I think what we wanted to accomplish today, and I have Miranda here, which I'm so grateful for, is to talk about a very tangible example of someone who's been going through a desert time and been learning some powerful lessons. So I am joined by Miranda Poen. Thank you very much, Miranda.
Thank you for having me.
Good, thank you. And that's Poeun, right?
3 vowels, yes.
Okay, great. It's a Cambodian last name, I just found out. So, and you've been going through a little bit of time over the last about year and a half, you would say?
I would a little over a year.
A little over a year. And you feel like you've been in the desert in many ways, would you say? And so describe to us about, in a practical way, or just whatever way you want, what has it been like for you? What's life been like?
So about a year ago, 2 Julys ago, I started experiencing times once a month where I would have this day, and I call it my volcano day, where I experience really intense anxiety and intense fear, and I feel very overwhelmed. And so overwhelmed, so fearful, so anxious that I feel like I could die from all of it, of how intense all of those emotions feel. And it happens about once a month, and it's been happening a little bit over a year now. And when it started, it was very scary, and it actually caused a really intense year spiritually for me, because it brought up a lot of questions. It brought up a lot of doubts, and it brought up a lot of intense emotions. So that's when my year's kind of been like. Okay,
thanks for sharing that. And I appreciate the vulnerability. It's great to be a part of a church family that we can talk about these things together. So what was the impact on your relationships? Like your husband, your parents, your friends, like what was that like?
So like I said, I didn't know what was going on with me, because it came out of nowhere. It really did. Nothing was happening in my life that was traumatic or life-changing. I mean, I had just come back from an awesome Colorado vacation with a bunch of girls when it hit me a few days later. So I was very confused and I felt very lost because, again, I didn't know what was wrong with me, and I would look up on Google, which I don't.
It's not always the best idea to look up stuff on Google, is it?
But, you're trying to figure out, like, what's going on with me and how do I fix this, And, again, like, I had never battled really with anything super intense. I had a little bit of anxiety, but that more came out in my adult years. So I had never really experienced anything like that before. So I became just super caught up in what I was going through, and I became very inward focused because I was so afraid of what was happening to me, and if I was never going to get better, that I just became very inward focused. and I also didn't really want to share with a lot of people the thoughts that were going through my head and the emotions that I was going through, because they were very dark and very scary. And so I really pushed people away for a long time because I was afraid. I was afraid of what they would think of what I was going through. So it was really hard, and obviously my husband, who's amazing, was seeing everything happening to me because he lives with me.
Can't hide from that, right?
Yeah, you can't really hide from that. And he was seeing these intense episodes I was having, and I know before it was happening, he, was praying and really trying to work on having a lot of growing in his compassion. And so I was like, thanks for praying that, Jason. It's your fault I have this. No, but...
How long you guys been married?
2 years.
2 years, yeah. So he's like, what did I sign up for, huh?
Yeah, I mean, that was honestly my fear, was that, I wasn't like this before we got married. And then I was all of a sudden. And so, Satan really messed with me a lot. And one of my biggest fears was that Jason wouldn't want to stick through it with me because it's not what he had originally signed up for. But it was hard. I think it was a little hard on our marriage at first because Jason couldn't see what was wrong with me. He just saw my emotions, and he couldn't understand, and I couldn't articulate what was happening in my head and in my mind. And there were so many times I just looked at him and I was like, I think I'm going crazy. Like, I legitimately think I'm going crazy, and I don't know who I am anymore. And so it was really intense on our marriage at first, which brought me a lot of guilt because it was because of me, it was because of me that we were going through this. And so over time, though, I think we were able to talk through it, and I was able to tell him what I needed on my days, that I needed it, and the things that he could do for me. That was very simple. Like, if I was going through one of my volcano days, like, I just needed him to hold my hand. I just needed him to put my arm around me. I just needed him to just sit on the couch with me, because he was always a physical reminder that God was with me, because I felt so blessed to have my husband. So even though I didn't feel all those things, he was my physical reminder. And I think with my mom and my dad, it was just really hard for them to see me go through this. And my friends, I didn't really open up with them really, I would say almost a year into it, that I really just tried to open up about what was really going on.
Wow. First of all, I'm so grateful for your vulnerability and courage, sharing everything. I think it's interesting because being in the place you were, even though, you did talk it through with Jason and everything, you still didn't know what was going on. And that's the hard part about the desert, right? You're there, you're thirsty, you're hot, you don't know where the water is, you don't know where the shade is. And so you did start trying to pursue figuring out what was going on. You tried to figure out physically what was going on with you, I think therapy. So maybe you want to share a little bit about how were you trying to seek solutions?
Physically seeking solutions, like he said, I started going to a therapist, a Christian counselor, and I started going to the doctor because I was really trying to figure out the different aspects of things that could possibly be going on with me. Was this physical? Was this emotional? Did something happen in my past that's bringing this up and that's being triggered right now? That's something I don't remember. So I was going and doing all these things, and they would say, okay, it's probably this, and we would try it out, and it wouldn't be that, and then this. And so, I tried so many different things. Like, we thought it was mold in my apartment that was causing it. We thought that it was a hormonal imbalance. We thought it was just some emotional stuff going on inside of me in therapy that it was going on. And so every time it was like, this is it, this is the answer, and then it wouldn't be it, So it was a lot of up and down, and a lot of frustration, and a lot of questions for God that I had.
I hit my mic on the table, so it just turned off. So that's frustrating. That's tough. And I think something else had happened. You shared with me during that time as well. Did you want to share about that? Or?
Yeah. Okay. So like I said, whenever I have my volcano days, I feel overwhelmed and fearful and anxious to the point where I almost feel like I could die from how intense my emotions feel. And so I had never experienced that before. And so around that time, Jason and I lost people, both directly and indirectly, that took their lives. 4 people, and in a very short amount of time. And it was very scary because I had never experienced something so terrible that you could see why people would want to give up. And it was really hard because Satan really attacked me with so many questions and so many just doubts. I just really questioned our purpose in life when there was so much suffering and so much pain. And I had never had to face that or experience that because, like I said, like before this, my life was wonderful, very blessed. And it still is, but I had never experienced these questions and these deep emotions and these deep feelings. And seeing these people that decide to give up was very hard. And it made me question God's goodness, his fairness, his sovereignty, you know, because I experienced that hopelessness. I felt it. And I saw that when people get to a point where they have no hope, that's all they feel they have left. And it was very hard to have felt that and to have seen people that decided to do that and to wonder, is that going to happen to me? Like, am I gonna give up hope? And it really made me struggle with God because I had lost sight of my hope.
So there you are in the desert, wandering, and it's really tough. And then something happened. The forgiving forward thing happened. Things started to click, and maybe you can share with us what was your experience? What happened? What was God teaching you? What were you hearing him? And where were you feeling him lead you?
God and I went through a journey. I was really angry with God. And I didn't feel like it was fair. You know, I felt like, you know, I've been pretty okay, God. Like, you know, I don't understand why you would all of a sudden just put this in my life. So like I said, I was really struggling with my faith and wondering where I really was at with him. I think some of the biggest things that I learned on there was one, relying on God's truth rather than my emotions. So even though I felt that God wasn't with me, I felt alone, I felt overwhelmed, I felt like there was no purpose to my pain, none of that was true because the truth was saying completely different. And what Marcus talks about with, you know, holding on to your emotions lightly but clinging to your values, I really had to put that into practice because my emotions were so intense and so overwhelming and they felt so real, but they weren't. And I had to remember that and I had to cling on to that because I don't know where I would be if I had just went on my emotions. And there were days where I definitely went off and just like let my emotions go wherever they took me. But it was God's truth that kept me grounded so many of my darkest days.
So you weren't wearing a WWJF, what would Jesus feel? It was what would Jesus do bracelet?
Yes, I did not let I really fought hard to not let my feelings dictate the truth. And I think that's really hard, especially as a woman, because I am so led by my emotions. And Jesus did not go off of his emotions.
We were joking earlier, there's a Babylon Bee article online that says, you know, there's the classic bracelet, but there's a temptation we always have to think what we feel is truth, and it's not always true, right? Okay, so that was one thing. And you said that you were wrestling with God, you were angry with him. So what were your conversations like, or what ended up happening there?
A lot of my questions to God were, what is the purpose? You know, what is our purpose? What is my purpose? How can you let these things happen to people in general, but people that love you? How can you let us go through such pain and heartache? How are you fair? How is this fair? How are you good? like I would compare like how much I love my dog. I'm like, I would never let him go through this, God. Like I would swoop him up. And actually, one of the things that I did was I fasted. And in my prayers, it was like, no, God, you will heal me. Like, you will heal me because you say that in your scriptures, like, people fasted and you answered them and you gave them what they wanted. And I want, like, this is what I want and you will heal me. And so I had a very prideful look at it really exposed the pride in my heart going through this with how I didn't want to go through this, so therefore I should not have to go through it. And viewing God more as a vending machine, like I'm doing all of these things, so you should give me what I've asked, and I'm fasting, I'm giving something up for you. Why are you not giving me what I want? So it really exposed my heart with viewing God as someone who just gives me what I want. And I think that one of the hardest lessons that I learned that was a big turnaround for me was that my life isn't about me anymore. And that when I decided to make Jesus Lord, I decided that I would glorify him through whatever stage I went in life, whether the good or the bad, that it's not about me and it's not about my comfortability. I think the teens, we were going over idolatry in our classes this past month, and it really exposed to me that my health and my comfort was an idol to me, because as soon as it was taken away, my faith was shaken completely. And it's just like Paul was saying, where we have our boxes as Westerners, right? We're Westerners, yeah.
We're Westerners.
I'm a teacher. So I felt like when God took that idol out of my life, my comfort, my health, my easy life, my box was completely destroyed of who I thought God was. And I felt like this whole year, God was helping me to rebuild that box, but also for it to not be a box, for it to be something that he can expand himself in and expose himself to me, and for me to learn, and for me to accept that God wasn't who I necessarily thought he was, and to love him for who he actually is, which is a God that comforts us through our pain and suffering in his way of comforting us in pain and suffering, and not that it's necessarily going to take it away, but that he's going to be there with us through it, and that he is strong enough to get us through anything that we ever go through in life. And I think I had to really learn that, and I had to really realize that when I was in my desert, God was giving me enough, and that at the end, God has to be enough. And I think that I was realizing that God wasn't enough when he took away the things that I got so much comfort from. And so that was really hard. It was a very humbling experience to realize, like, wow, I'm kind of bossing God around a little bit in my prayers and expecting him to give me what I want. And instead of, there's a song that talks about wanting the healer more than the healing. And I wanted the healer. I wanted the healing more than I wanted God. And so it was a very humbling experience to have my heart super exposed and super just the pride and the expectation that God owed me so much, when it says in the Bible that any extra gift we get from God is extra. The true gift that should be enough for us is his grace and his mercy and his forgiveness. And I had to get back to realizing that that was enough. And anything else extra that I get in this life is just an added blessing that I don't deserve.
Mm-hmm. Well, and although we wouldn't, yes. This is just rich with goodness, this whole conversation. I'm very grateful. There's so much to learn here. I feel very inspired personally. I think what's interesting is how when we're in the desert, we would never choose to go there, right? We just wouldn't want to go there, and it does destroy our box that we put God in sometimes. And we're like, oh, I hate that when our box gets destroyed, because we like controlling things and we like having things our way, but it's yet God is teaching us these like huge lessons, like these big lessons. And I know one of the things that you shared when we were talking earlier is how much forgiveness was a lesson that played into that. Can you share a little bit about that and about what you learned about forgiveness, and even how it's tied to the mental, to the physical, to the spiritual, to the emotional?
Absolutely. So as I was learning all of this, I went on a girls' trip with my mom and our friend who goes to North River, and she's the Christian counselor that I was seeing. I would do phone and Skype calls with her, and she knows me very well, and she knows my mom very well, and she's amazing, an amazing Christian counselor who brings in the spiritual as much as the physical and emotional and mental to her therapy. And I completely believe in it, and I totally think that our spirituality is connected to every part of us. And so she really brought that in for me. And one of the things when we're about to go on our trip to Dollywood, to Gatlinburg, Tennessee, which is where I would go on vacation.
To each his own right there.
Was she said, she was telling my mom and I, she wanted us to do this program together called Forgiving Forward. And in my mind, I was like, oh, it's probably for my mom because...
Of course it is.
Because Nancy always has this ulterior motives because she's a therapist, so she just always is trying to help us because I always thought I was a pretty forgiving person. But the program was so powerful. It changed my world, to be honest, and it really was a monumental part of me healing and processing and growing closer to God. So we did this program together, and it talks about forgiveness and the power of forgiveness. And one of the big things that it talks about is how God expects forgiven people to forgive. Because when Christ died for all. So he paid for everybody's debt, even the debts that are against us, the people that hurt us. So everyone has been paid for. And when you expect someone to pay you back for something that's already been forgiven, like a debt, you're committing fraud. In the real world, that's how it works. When something has been paid, a debt has been paid, but they're still asking you for money, it's fraud. And that's exactly what it is when we don't forgive someone who sinned against us. Christ already died for them. Christ died for their sins against you and against me. So when we still hold them to that debt, we are committing fraud. And we're saying that Jesus' blood was enough for me, but it was enough for it to forgive me, but it's not enough for me to forgive someone else. And so that was and that's just one little nugget in the whole program. And it completely exposed my mom and I's heart to, one, how we forgive, which I think that, if God's word isn't wrecking you, it's not doing its job, because Jesus came to wreck us and change us completely. And one of the things about this program is it goes through and it shows you how you've been taught to forgive someone, and then it destroys that box, and it helps you rebuild a Christ-like box with forgiveness, and just the power behind forgiving. And when I was able to go through, even you might think like, oh, well, yeah, I guess I need to forgive that person, and yeah, that person and that person. And there were things that going through the program got exposed in my heart that I would have never known was there unless I had gone through this program. Things that I was holding against people that are the closest to me that I would have never known unless I had gone through this program. Because at first I'm like, well, yeah, I guess I need to forgive that person. But then when you allow this to really go inside your heart, it exposes so many things that you didn't know was there. And so we went through that program and the healing that goes along with it. And it also even teaches you how to pre-forgive people, how to already forgive people before it even happens to you, before anyone even hurts you. And so it's super powerful. And after that happened, it had been about a year since, me trying to figure out what's going on. And that was one of my big struggles too, was like, why don't I know what's going on with me? Why is it taking so long? Because I thought that if I found what was wrong with me, I'd find a cure. And so after going through the forgiveness program and going through a lot of hurt that I've had, God completely showed me what I had, which after I'd done the program, I came home and I had another episode, and I met with my doctor, and we were able to immediately figure out what was wrong with me after me going for a whole year and not knowing what was going on. I came back from that, and it was as plain as the nose on my face. It felt like when we were finally like, oh yeah, that is what's going on. Okay, so that was pretty powerful, and that was cool. But I mean, the biggest thing about it was the expectation of forgiven people to forgive others, and that that when we don't forgive other people, God's not able to do his job. And so it's a pretty powerful program that we got to go through together.
And so now you're actually starting a women's group with the Forgiving Forward, right? Which my lovely wife is a part of, which I'm grateful for. So now she can forgive me if I forget to take out the trash. So that's really awesome, actually, a benefit to me. But no, I can you imagine if we are people that forgive as God forgives, how that would revolutionize this room and outside this room? Can you imagine what we would spread? And it's just hard, though, because, and I think it is something that we have to work at. I know that I was reading about the Forgiving Forward program, the pastor that started that, he had gone on a 3-day retreat, and he had been in physical pain and for like a year and a half and kind of tormented in some ways. And he really felt that God was really pressing on him that he had not forgiven someone. And he thought he had, because he had written a letter of forgiveness even to that person from the interview I saw with him. And then it was like, no, like he felt God was saying, nope, you haven't forgiven. And he went through this whole process and realized he hadn't forgiven that person, even though he'd written a letter of forgiveness. And that did actually bring healing to him. And we don't have time to read all of it, but in Psalm 38, when you read David's psalm there in his poetic prayer to God, he's talking about his whole body being crushed, his whole body being consumed with pain. And what he attributes part of it to is his sin. And it's interesting because I think because we're Western, we tend to compartmentalize a lot of things. Oh, it's mental, or it's physical, or it's emotional, But can all these things be tied up? I believe they are. I believe these things can be connected.
Yeah, one of the biggest things, a part of the program that was very eye-opening, was there is a parable that Jesus says in Matthew where it talks about a king that forgave a servant of a huge debt, and it says like deny and menias or something like that, and we don't know how that compares to today, but the debt that the king forgave the servant was in today's money compared to $7.5 billion. And then when the servant turned around and didn't forgive the debt of the other servant, that's comparable to like $15,000 today, which is still a lot of money, and that would still hurt your heart a little bit if that were to happen, but that's something you can eventually pay off over time. But if you owe a debt of $7.5 billion, you would never be able to repay someone that debt. And that connects to us, that we will never be able to repay the debt that Jesus paid for us. But anything that is ever done to us is nothing compared to that debt. And at the end of that parable, it talks about how the king allowed the servant that didn't forgive his fellow servant to be thrown out and tormented by jailers. And that doesn't mean that we lose our salvation or our love for God, but God takes unforgiveness so seriously that we are tormented by our unforgiveness, and God can't protect us from it. He allows us to be tormented because that is how intensely he cares that we forgive. And it makes sense why God would take unforgiveness so seriously, why it is a sin, and the most harshly punished sin in the Bible is because that's the whole reason of the gospel, was for our forgiveness. And that when we turn around and can't forgive others, no wonder God is so upset with that. No wonder he takes that so seriously. And the torment that I was released in my life, torment, it sounds like really harsh, but I mean, I had to think about like, what am I not allowing God to protect me from when I haven't forgiven someone? And the things that have happened that have been taken off of my shoulders, the things that have stopped happening to me because of forgiveness, some of it was instantaneous, some of it happened over a few days, but it was insane. Like, my mom and I have so many stories of what has happened since going through that program and learning about forgiveness and how important it is. And so, like you said, I started my own group on Thursday nights, and my mom is actually Marika Modlin over there, beautiful woman with the tropical shirt.
There she is.
She's actually going to start a group herself. So if this is something that speaks to you, and I encourage you, if it tugs at your heart, there's a reason for it, to go and talk to her to see if you can join her group, because it is powerful and it will transform and change your life. I can guarantee that personally. And I know the women in our group, first one, bawling, all of us. But it's great. Again, it takes your box and it destroys it, and then it rebuilds something more beautiful and Christ-like.
It's good. And we're going to get a guys group, and we'll be bawling too. So it's going to be wonderful. So I guess, your symptoms, you still have some, right? And so it's not a complete resolve. And in Western movie culture, we want like the ending with the complete resolve, right? Oh, happy ending, total. But what I'm learning, I think, is that God is bigger than that clean resolve at the end, where Harry Potter kills whatever, Voldemort or whatever. It's not a complete resolve where everything is done, but yet God had all these huge lessons. And so I know you're hoping for mini volcano days, not huge volcano days, but even so, even with the rough desert of last year, would you ever, now looking back, would you ever have not wanted to go through that? Do you regret going through the desert?
It's still not easy. It's still not easy, but no, I would not, because I look back and I think of who I was before and all the things that God has exposed me about myself and my character and my heart and my pride, and I would never go back. As hard as this past year was, as terrible as it was, as draining, and how hard it was on our marriage at times, and my relationships and myself mentally and physically and emotionally, I would never want to go back to who I was before, because I feel like I actually rely on God. And I didn't know what that meant before, but now I understand what it means to walk with God daily, because I need to walk with him daily. And I would never want to go back or unlearn the things that I have learned. And the only way I would have learned them is if God were to take away the things in my life that I didn't realize I had before him. And I think this past year was me learning how to trust God in a new phase of life. And it was learning to walk with God in a new area that I've never had to trust him or walk with him through. And so I wouldn't ever take that back, because I am a completely different person in a lot of sense because of it.
That's awesome. And I wrote down a quote that when we had talked over the phone, you said, "I care more about people's eternity now than I did a year ago."
I do. I feel like when you experience hopelessness, you realize that there are people in this world that feel that when they have no hope, they have nothing. What is our purpose outside of God, really? And so I think that really woke me up to care about people's eternities. I think I did care, but not to this extent, not enough to where it would make me step out of my comfort zone. It would make me serve someone that was inconvenient for me. If it made me uncomfortable, or if I felt like I was not going to please someone by what I was going to say, of course I would stop and I wouldn't do it. But now I feel like I don't care, because I know what I have and I know what people in the world don't have. And I don't get how people do it without God. I'm so thankful. I wrote down, but whoever has been forgiven little loves little. And I think that was me, was that I didn't realize how much I've been forgiven and how much hope I have because of Christ. And now, because I feel like I've been forgiven of so much and loved so much, I care, and I go after it way more now than I ever did before.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. As we shift to communion and we take these thoughts of the desert, I want to leave you with a thought to meditate on as we're about to take communion. And that is, Jesus in Luke 4, as you guys remember, he was led to the desert. By who? By the Spirit. And a lot of times when we see that in his 3 temptations, it almost feels like he's being attacked, and he is, but it was the Spirit that led him to that place. That God was bringing him there for a specific reason. So he's not passively just this victim. He was there for a reason. And maybe right now, maybe today, you're going through your own desert time. Maybe you're in high school or you're in middle school and you're experiencing a lot of peer pressure and you're getting bullied, or there's things that are happening, or you're wondering who you are. And maybe it's a crucible that you're there for a reason. As Brenda said, maybe Jesus is there to wreck you for a reason. Okay? And if you're over 25, Jesus wrecking you is actually a good thing, not a bad thing. Just to clarify that. But it's maybe you're in the situation at work. Maybe you're a boss who is saying cruel things, or maybe he went through a hard time and he is irate, and you're in a situation where you don't want to forgive him. He doesn't deserve it. She doesn't deserve it. Maybe these things are there for a specific reason, because sometimes God leads us into that desert so that we can become someone different, so we can gain a new intimacy with him that we never would have had. Because like you were saying, Miranda, right? A year ago, you didn't have the intimacy with God that you have now. And that is really powerful. And the desert is an interesting word because all throughout the Old and the New Testament, the desert is this place where you hear the voice of God. And in Hosea, to prepare our minds, I wanted to read Hosea 2:13 through 20. God is trying to communicate with Israel to draw them back. And he says, I will punish her for the days she burned incense to the Baals, which were the false gods. She decked herself with rings and jewelry and went after her lovers, but me she forgot, declares the Lord. Therefore, I am going to allure her. I will lead her into the wilderness and speak tenderly to her. And that word wilderness in the Hebrew is midbar. Midbar is the same word for desert. And so he's leading her, he's alluring her and leading her, Israel, into the desert and speaking tenderly. That is really powerful, because we think about how with us, if we're in the desert, we have no other distractions. We need to listen to God's voice to tell us, hey, I'm enough. Even when you're out of control, I'm enough. Abraham was shaped by the desert. Jacob was shaped by the desert. Moses spent 40 years in the desert and was shaped in the desert. David was shaped in the desert. All of these heroes of the Bible were shaped there. And then in verse 15, he says, there I will give her vineyards, and will make the valley of Achor a door of hope. There she will respond as in the days of her youth, as in the day she came up out of Egypt. In that day, declares the Lord, you will call me my husband, and you will no longer call me my master. And that's the difference. God is no longer this master, this untouchable. There's a new intimacy that comes from the desert. He says, you will call me my husband. That's powerful. If we can get there in our walks with God, that's why we do church. That's why we come together as a people. That's who we want to be. That's what's going to get you through middle school. That's what gets you through high school. That's what gets you hope when you have no hope as an adult and you think life is meaningless. Meaningless. No, because God is hope, and you have a new intimacy, and that even though we're physically on this earth for 80, 90, 100 years, if we're lucky, or whatever, that's not the point. We have a new hope in God. So let's thank Jesus for showing us the way, and let's go ahead and let's pray and absorb that together as a church family. Father, we come before you just grateful for the sharing today. Thank you for Miranda's courage. Thank you that we have an amazing church family. Thank you for the ways that you lead us, that you prompt us, how we can hear your voice in the desert. Father, when we think that shepherds literally lead their flock by just their voice alone, that there can be several flocks in a sheep pen, and you get one shepherd who calls his sheep, and only those sheep come out of the pen. That is such a powerful image for us to think about, us being led by you. Father, I pray that when the world calls, when our selfish worldly ambition calls, when all the other voices call, and you call, that we'll hear your voice, that we'll be led by you. We'll follow your voice. You'll lead us to the water. You'll lead us to the shade. Father, I pray that we can meditate on these things, that as we take communion today, that we can consider where we are at spiritually and whether we need to forgive you because we're upset with you, or even though, in a sense, logically, we know that there's no reason why we should have to forgive you, but we might be in that place. Or whether we have to forgive other people, I pray that we can get our hearts to a place where we have this intimacy with you and we say, thank you, as if you are our husband and not just a master. Thank you for that, Father, and thank you for that privilege. In Jesus' name I pray, amen.